billionaire Mafia boss handed 4 unlimited black cards to 4 women. Whoever spent it best would become his wife. 3 bought penthouses, supercars, and corrupt officials. But when he saw the receipt from his overlooked, plus-size housekeeper, it changed his entire empire forever. Listen closely. Vincent Kane did not believe in love. He believed in leverage, loyalty, and return on investment. As the undisputed head of the Kane organization, controlling everything from the New Jersey freight yards to the private clubs of Manhattan, Vincent was a man who possessed everything except an heir and a queen. His sprawling penthouse above Central Park West, a fortress of glass, steel, and imported travertine, was unusually quiet this Friday evening. The air was thick with the scent of aged bourbon and the lingering smoke of a Cuban cigar. Gathered around his massive, custom-built walnut dining table were 3 of the most dangerous, beautiful, and well-connected women in New York's underworld. There was Selena, a statuesque redhead with pale gray eyes, the daughter of a Miami cartel liaison. Beside her sat Vanessa, a razor-sharp Ivy League tax attorney who laundered the Kane family's money through a maze of offshore trusts. And finally, Isabel, a dark-haired socialite whose political connections reached the very top of the mayor's office. They were all stunning. They were all ruthless. And they all wanted Vincent's ring on their finger. Outside, the city glittered 40 floors below, a carpet of amber lights stretching toward the black ribbon of the Hudson. None of it mattered to the 3 women at the table. Their world was measured in leverage, not skylines. Selena had grown up watching her father count cash in a Miami warehouse. Vanessa had clerked for a federal judge before she learned the far more lucrative art of hiding money from one. Isabel had been bred from birth to charm men who could make problems disappear. Each of them had spent years preparing for exactly this moment, the night Vincent Kane finally decided to choose a wife. "You're all aware of why you're here," Vincent began, his voice a low, gravel baritone that commanded absolute silence. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored Brioni suit and withdrew a sleek black leather card case. With a flick of his wrist, he slid 3 heavy titanium American Express cards across the polished wood. One stopped in front of each woman. "These are unlimited," Vincent stated, leaning forward, his dark eyes locking onto each of them. "No spending cap, no restrictions. You have exactly 72 hours. By midnight Monday, whoever has used my money to bring the most value to this family will stand beside me as my wife." Selena smirked, her manicured fingers grazing the titanium edge of the card. "Value is subjective, Vincent. Are we talking power, real estate, or pure intimidation?" "I'm leaving that up to you," he replied coldly. "Show me how your mind works." Vanessa adjusted her designer glasses, already calculating wire transfer routes in her head, while Isabel simply smiled, envisioning the official she could buy by morning. But as Isabel reached for her card, she paused. "Vincent, darling, there are 4 cards in your case. Who's the 4th for? Did a rival's daughter fail to show?" Vincent looked down at the leather case in his hand. The 4th black card gleamed under the ambient lighting. He hadn't originally planned for a 4th candidate, but as he looked up, his gaze drifted past the 3 glamorous women, landing on the far corner of the room. There, quietly dusting the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, was Renata. Renata was Vincent's live-in housekeeper. She was a heavy-set woman in her late 20s. Her standard black and white uniform clung tightly to her broad waist and thick arms, clearly uncomfortable as she stretched to reach the higher shelves. She had a round, kind face, perpetually flushed from the physical exertion of maintaining the massive penthouse, and she kept her dark hair tied back in a messy, practical bun. Because of her size, her quiet demeanor, and her status as staff, the Mafia elite treated her like a piece of furniture. She was completely invisible to them. Hitmen, capos, and corrupt councilmen had openly discussed murders, bribes, and betrayals in front of her, entirely confident that the heavy-set woman scrubbing the baseboards was too simple to understand a word of it. Vincent had always noticed her silent efficiency, but today a sudden, cynical idea struck him. He was surrounded by vipers who only knew how to take. What would happen if he gave absolute power to someone who had spent her entire life at the very bottom? "Renata," Vincent called out. The housekeeper froze. The dust rag slipped from her thick fingers. She turned around slowly, her eyes wide with sheer terror. "Yes, Mr. Kane," she stammered, her chest heaving slightly from her labor. "Come here." The three women at the table exchanged bewildered glances. Selena scoffed audibly as Renata awkwardly shuffled across the expensive Persian rug, keeping her head bowed submissively. She stopped a few feet from the table, nervously wiping her calloused hands on her apron. Vincent stood up, walked over to her, and held out the fourth titanium black card. "Take it," he commanded softly. Renata stared at the card as if it were a live grenade. "Sir, I just need my regular paycheck on Friday, sir. I don't need—" "It's not a bonus, Renata. It's a test," Vincent said, his eyes scanning her terrified face. 72 hours. Unlimited funds. Spend it." The room erupted. "Vincent, you cannot be serious," Isabel shrieked, her perfectly composed demeanor cracking. "You're giving a Centurion card to the housekeeper. She's going to max it out at a drive-thru or buy out a bakery." Selena laughed cruelly, eyeing Renata's heavy frame up and down with blatant disgust. "Look at her, Vincent. She's overweight, she's poor, and she's the help. What could she possibly buy that brings value to your empire? A lifetime supply of donuts for your foot soldiers?" Vanessa sneered, shaking her head. "This is an insult to us. You're comparing us to her." Vincent's expression hardened into stone. He slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the crystal glasses. "I said this is a test. If you three are as brilliant as you claim, you have nothing to fear from a housekeeper." She turned back to Renata and pressed the card firmly into her trembling hand. "Do not disappoint me. Midnight Monday." Renata swallowed hard, her fingers closing around the cold metal of the card. She didn't look at the other women. She just nodded, her mind already racing faster than any of them could possibly comprehend. The countdown began immediately. Vincent retreated to his private study, a wall of monitors displaying his secure banking networks. Every time one of the 4 Centurion cards was swiped, a detailed alert pinged on his encrypted tablet. He poured himself a glass of 18-year-old scotch and waited to see how the women would wage war with his wallet. The first 24 hours were predictably extravagant. Alert. Card 1. Selena. $200,000. Real estate transaction. 1 Beekman Place penthouse deposit. $900,000. Bugatti Manhattan. Custom Chiron Supersport. $800. Bergdorf Goodman wardrobe and styling. $95,000. Harry Winston. Flawless diamond necklace. Vincent nodded slowly. Selena was buying status. She was securing a fortress in a prestige building and establishing herself as untouchable high society. In the Mafia world, projecting wealth was a weapon. It told rivals you were thriving. It was a solid, if uninspired, strategy. 12 hours later, Vanessa began her assault on the financial system. Alert. Card 2. Vanessa. $800,000. Corporate acquisition of Meridian Freight Logistics through a Cayman holding structure. $800,000. Wire transfer. Undisclosed PAC tied to the Deputy Police Commissioner. $600,000. 10-year lease on a private terminal at Elizabeth Port. Vincent was impressed. Vanessa wasn't buying shiny toys. She was buying infrastructure. Meridian Logistics was a struggling trucking company Vincent knew was desperately needed to move product across state lines without federal interference. Bribing the deputy commissioner and securing a private terminal gave the Kane family a total stranglehold on the coastal smuggling routes. She was proving she could be a brilliant underboss. Then came Isabel, operating in the shadows of high society. Alert. Card 3. Isabel. $100,000. Sotheby's auction house. Patek Philippe Grandmaster Chime. $200,000. Bellagio Casino. Debt settlement for federal judge Walter Whitmore. $800,000. Silicon Valley. 15% stake in Cipher Grid encrypted communications startup. Isabel was playing a psychological game. The watch was a bribe for Vincent himself. A display that she knew his tastes. Settling the federal judge's gambling debt gave Vincent a puppet in the federal courts, essentially guaranteeing immunity for his top lieutenants. Buying into an encrypted tech startup ensured secure communications for his soldiers. It was now Sunday evening. Only 30 hours remained. Between the three women, they had spent nearly $30 million of Vincent's money. He was satisfied with the results. Any of the three would make a formidable Mafia wife. But his eyes kept drifting to the 4th tab on his screen. Card 4. Renata. Balance. Transactions. None. Vincent frowned. Renata hadn't returned to work at the penthouse since Friday night. He assumed she'd taken the card and run, paralyzed by the wealth, too terrified of the consequences to actually spend a dime. Maybe Selena had been right. The quiet housekeeper simply didn't possess the predatory instinct required to survive in his world. Across the river in a cramped, humid one-bedroom apartment in Jersey City, Renata sat at a chipped kitchen table. The heavy black card sat in the center of the table. She stared at it, her jaw clenched. She wasn't thinking about diamonds. She wasn't thinking about penthouses, because Renata was overweight, because she sweated when she carried the laundry, because she looked like a nobody. Men with guns and blood on their hands ignored her. She thought about the community college accounting courses she'd taken at night after her shifts, courses she'd never told anyone about because nobody had ever asked what she did with her free time. She thought about the years before this job, temping in back offices, watching men half as sharp as her get promoted over her simply because they knew how to fill a room. Nobody had ever handed her capital before. Nobody had ever handed her anything. But Renata possessed a photographic memory. For 3 years, while scrubbing stains out of Vincent's carpets and emptying ashtrays filled with the remnants of secret meetings, she had listened. She knew that Vincent's right-hand man, Dante, was skimming from the construction unions. She knew that the rival syndicate, the Kozlovs, had been buying off Kane Street soldiers for months. And most importantly, she'd been dusting the air vents in the guest bathroom 2 weeks ago when she overheard Dante whispering into a burner phone. Dante had sold Vincent out. A massive hit was scheduled. They were going to raid the penthouse and kill Vincent on Monday night. Renata looked at her own reflection in the dark screen of her cheap television. Society had told her she was slow, plain, and worthless. The women at that table had laughed at her. She reached for her phone. It was time to show them what an invisible woman could do with unlimited power. At exactly 6 on Monday, Vincent's encrypted tablet finally chimed. He bolted awake, grabbing the device from his nightstand. Card 4. Renata. $5 Jersey City Bodega, prepaid burner phone. Vincent squinted. $45. Was she buying breakfast? 10 minutes later, the tablet chimed again. Alert. Card 4. Renata. $16,200. Newark Auto Repair and Salvage. $20,000. Wire transfer. Dark web data broker. Cayman routing. Vincent sat up, his heart rate spiking. The dark web. What the hell was his housekeeper doing on encrypted servers? The alerts started flooding in faster and faster, escalating into absolute madness. 2,300,000. Sentinel Risk Group. Private military contractor deployment retainer. $50,000. Flight charter services. 3 heavy-lift helicopters on standby. $11 million hostile debt buyout. Dante's holding companies. Vincent threw the blankets off and stood up, his mind reeling. Dante. Why was his housekeeper buying the debt on his underboss's shell companies? How did she even know those holding companies existed? Only a handful of men in the world knew Dante controlled those assets. Then the final alert hit. It was so massive, so incredibly audacious, that Vincent actually dropped the tablet onto the carpet. $42 million. Escrow transfer. Kozlov syndicate truce clause activation. His plus-size housekeeper, the woman who cleaned his toilets, had just spent over $57 million in the span of 2 hours. She hadn't bought a dress. She hadn't bought a car. She had just bought a private mercenary force, acquired total financial leverage over Vincent's treacherous second-in-command, and somehow paid off his greatest mortal enemies to stand down. Suddenly, the reinforced steel doors of the penthouse elevator dinged. Vincent reached for the loaded pistol taped under his nightstand. The security systems hadn't tripped. No alarms were blaring. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed across the marble floors of the hallway. Vincent stepped out of the bedroom, his weapon raised, expecting to see a team of Kozlov assassins or a traitorous Dante. Instead, standing in the center of his living room, surrounded by 6 heavily armed ex-military contractors in tactical gear, was Renata. She was no longer wearing her tight, suffocating uniform. She was dressed in a custom-tailored, flowing black trench coat that commanded respect. Her posture straight, her eyes burning with a cold, terrifying intelligence. In one hand, she held the titanium black card. In the other, she held a bound, bruised, bleeding man, throwing him onto the expensive Persian rug. It was Dante. Renata looked up at Vincent, her face devoid of fear. "You told me to bring value to your empire, Mr. Kane," she said smoothly, her voice echoing in the silent penthouse. "The other women bought you toys. I bought you your life. Now let's talk about my new position." Vincent slowly lowered his pistol, the barrel dipping toward the floor, though his finger remained dangerously close to the trigger. The penthouse, usually a sanctuary of controlled silence, felt completely foreign. 6 highly trained mercenaries from Sentinel Risk Group, men who looked like they'd just rotated out of a combat zone, stood in a perfect defensive perimeter, and in the center of it all was Renata. The mercenaries didn't so much as glance at her, which told Vincent everything he needed to know about the chain of command she'd already established. She did not flinch under Vincent's intense, calculating stare. For 3 years she had scrubbed the grout in his master bathroom, buffed the imported travertine floors, and pressed the very Brioni suit he was currently wearing. She had been a ghost. Now she was the most commanding presence in a room full of killers. "Dante," Vincent breathed, his voice dangerously low. He looked down at the bruised, bleeding man bound on the rug. Dante, his underboss for a decade, the man who had stood up at Vincent's father's funeral. Dante spat blood onto the floor, his eyes wild with panic. "Vincent, listen to me. She's out of her mind. This cow hired guns to kidnap me. She's trying to stage a coup. Kill her." Renata calmly reached into the deep pocket of her tailored trench coat. She pulled out a sleek silver flash drive and tossed it onto the dining table. It clattered against empty crystal glasses. "At 6:15 this morning, I spent $16,200 at Newark Auto Repair and Salvage," Renata stated, her voice steady, carrying a natural authority that sent a shiver down Vincent's spine. "I didn't buy a car. I bought the loyalty of their head mechanic, Ray. Ray is the man who services Dante's armored fleet. I paid him to hand over the GPS and audio logs he secretly installed to blackmail Dante's drivers." Vincent stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Renata. "And the $420,000? The dark web data broker operating through a Cayman routing server," Renata replied without missing a beat. "I needed to match the audio logs with encrypted messaging traffic. Dante has been communicating with Yuri Kozlov for the last 6 months. They orchestrated a hit. At exactly 2:30 tomorrow morning, a Kozlov kill squad was supposed to breach your private elevator shaft. Dante disabled the secondary security grid yesterday afternoon." Vincent's jaw tightened. He looked down at his underboss. The terror in Dante's eyes was all the confession he needed. "You spent $11 million buying up his debt," Vincent said, piecing the financial puzzle together, his analytical mind catching up to her brilliant strategy. "Dante used his holding companies as collateral to secure a bridge loan from the Kozlovs to fund this coup," Renata explained, pacing slowly around the bound man, her heavy footfall silent on the thick rug. "When I used your American Express to execute a hostile debt buyout of those companies, I legally transferred the collateral to the Kane organization. Dante no longer owns his shipping fronts, his real estate, or his legitimate businesses. You do. I stripped him of his entire financial infrastructure before he even woke up." "And the $42 million to the Kozlovs?" Vincent asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. "It was an astronomical sum, enough to start a war, let alone end one." "A blood money truce," Renata said, her dark eyes locking with his. "I bypassed Yuri Kozlov and wired the money directly to the Kozlov Syndicate's Supreme Council. By accepting the transfer, the council officially disavowed Yuri's hit on you. If Yuri moves on this penthouse tonight, he defies his own bosses and becomes a dead man walking. I didn't just buy you an army, Vincent. I bought you peace." Silence descended on the room, broken only by Dante's ragged breathing. Vincent was entirely speechless. This woman possessed a logistical and tactical genius that rivaled the greatest Mafia dons in American history, and she had been dusting his bookshelves. Suddenly, the private elevator chimed. The heavy steel doors slid open. It was 11:40 p.m. The deadline was 15 minutes away. Selena, Vanessa, and Isabel stepped into the penthouse, laughing amongst themselves, dripping in freshly purchased diamonds, carrying designer bags, and wearing couture dresses that cost more than most people made in a decade. They had arrived for their coronation, fully expecting Vincent to be sitting with his scotch, ready to choose his queen. Instead, they froze in sheer horror. The penthouse looked like a war zone. 6 massive mercenaries with suppressed rifles had their weapons trained on the elevator doors. Dante was bleeding on the floor, and standing over him, completely dominating the space, was the housekeeper they had mocked just 3 days ago. What the hell is going on here? Selena shrieked, dropping her clutch. Vincent, are we under attack? Isabel gasped, pressing herself against the elevator wall. Vanessa, the sharp corporate attorney, immediately recognized the Sentinel insignia on the mercenaries' tactical vests. Those are Tier 1 private contractors. That's at least $2 million in retainers alone. Vincent, what is this? Vincent didn't answer then. He simply walked to his wet bar, poured 2 fingers of scotch, and leaned against the counter. A dark, terrifying smirk spread across his face. Come in, ladies. Renata was just explaining the concept of value. Renata turned to the 3 beautiful, trembling women. Her expression was completely devoid of pity. You 3 thought power was something you could wear, or something you could point at. Renata said, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. She pointed a manicured finger at Selena. You bought a penthouse at 1 Beekman. Did you know the Kozlov Syndicate owns the shell company that provides private security for that building? You didn't buy a fortress, says Selena. You bought a gilded cage and handed the Russians the keys. Selena's perfect face drained of all color. Renata turned to Vanessa. You bought a 10-year lease at Elizabethport. Brilliant on paper. But you failed to realize Dante controls the Stevdor unions on that pier. If Vincent had married you, you would have just handed his greatest traitor a brand new, fully funded smuggling hub. Vanessa's mouth opened, but no words came out. The Ivy League lawyer had been completely outplayed by a domestic worker. Finally, Renata's gaze shifted to Isabel. And you paid off Judge Whitmore's gambling debts at the Bellagio. A sweet gesture. But Whitmore is compromised by a rival cartel, not just Vegas casinos. He's stepping down in 3 months due to a sealed federal indictment. You spent $2 million on a dead asset. The 3 women stood paralyzed, completely humiliated, stripped of their arrogance in less than 60 seconds. Renata hadn't just outperformed them, she had systematically annihilated their entire worldview. Midnight chimed from the antique clock in the study. The 72 hours were up. Vincent set his glass down. The sharp clink echoed like a gunshot. He walked over to Dante. Without a word, he looked at Marcus, the lead Sentinel contractor. Take him to the facility in Red Hook, Vincent ordered coldly. Do not make it quick. Yes, Mr. Kane, Marcus grunted. 2 contractors hauled the screaming, pleading Dante off the floor and dragged him toward the service elevator. Vincent then turned his attention to the 3 women cowering near the entryway. They looked small, fragile, and utterly useless in the face of true syndicate warfare. Leave the cards on the table, Vincent commanded, his voice devoid of warmth. You'll all be escorted out. If I ever see any of you in this city again, I'll have Sentinel dump you in the Hudson. Get out. Trembling, Selena, Vanessa, and Isabel scrambled to drop the black titanium cards onto the walnut wood. They didn't speak. They didn't look back. They rushed into the elevator, the doors closing on their shattered ambitions. The penthouse was quiet again, save for the remaining 4 mercenaries standing guard at the perimeter. Vincent slowly walked toward Renata. For the first time in his life, he was not looking at a woman as a trophy or a political alliance. He was looking at an equal. He looked at her broad shoulders, her thick waist, the soft curves of her face, now hardened by an undeniable, lethal intelligence. Her physical weight didn't signify laziness or weakness. It anchored her. She was an immovable force in a world entirely populated by fragile, easily broken egos. You knew, Vincent said softly, stopping inches from her. You knew about Dante. You knew about the hit. You could have taken the card, bought a new identity, and disappeared before the shooting started. Why did you stay? Renata looked up into his dark, searching eyes. She didn't shrink back, because hiding is what maids do. Kane, I was done hiding. I spent my whole life being ignored because I don't look like them. Because I'm heavy. Because I'm heavy. You gave me the one thing no one else ever did. What was that? Vincent asked. Capital, Renata whispered fiercely. You gave me the weapon. I just showed you I knew how to pull the trigger. Vincent reached out, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. It was a deeply intimate, terrifyingly electric touch. You spent $57 million of my money, Renata. I saved $1 billion empire. She countered flawlessly, her chin lifting in defiance. Consider it a heavily discounted consulting fee. A low, genuine laugh rumbled in Vincent's chest, a sound his capos hadn't heard in years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small velvet box he had prepared for this exact moment. He snapped it open. Inside rested a flawless 8-carat emerald-cut diamond ring set in platinum. It was cold, heavy, and radiated absolute power. I said the woman who brought the most value to my family would stand beside me as my wife, Vincent stated, his eyes burning into hers. I don't want a maid, Renata, and I don't want a trophy. I need a queen who can see the knives in the dark before they're ever drawn. Renata looked at the ring. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She reached out with her steady fingers and took the ring from the box herself, sliding it onto her own finger. It fit perfectly. I won't be in the shadows anymore, Renata warned him, her voice a velvet threat. If I sit at your table, I help run the ledger. I handle the intelligence. I don't just wear the diamonds. I direct the empire. Vincent smiled, pulling her heavy, warm body flush against his tailored suit, reveling in the solid, undeniable reality of her. I wouldn't expect anything less, Mrs. Kane. Within 6 months, the New York underworld was completely reshaped. Rivals who expected Vincent Kane to weaken after the Kozlov incident quickly learned of the new terror operating out of the Central Park West penthouse. Renata Kane never lost her weight, nor did she try to fit into the superficial mold of Mafia wives. She wore custom-tailored dark suits, sat at the head of boardroom tables, and commanded an intelligence network that made federal agencies look amateur. Men who once ignored the housekeeper scrubbing the baseboards now kissed her ring and prayed she didn't find anomalies in their accounting. Junior capos learned to knock before entering a room she occupied. Bankers who once dismissed her calls now cleared their afternoons the moment her name appeared on their screens. The story of the maid who bought an empire spread through the underworld like wildfire, whispered in back rooms from Newark to Miami, until it became less a rumor and more a warning. Never assume you know what someone in the corner of the room is capable of. Vincent had given 4 women a black card to test them. 3 bought the illusion of power, but the woman society told him to ignore. She bought him the world. Did Renata's brilliant tactical mind leave you completely speechless? If you loved this intense mafia romance story of power, betrayal, and a woman who proved everyone wrong, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with your friends who love a jaw-dropping plot twist. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling real-life inspired audio dramas. Ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. What would you have bought? Comment below.